Tonight we wander through candlelit halls and shadowy markets where clinking coins once ruled like tiny, metallic gods, until something flat and silent, made of tree pulp and confusion, arrives to upend everything. Imagine you're a medieval trader, pockets jingling with silver, and someone hands you a delicate square of inked paper and tells you it's worth a sack of grain. Or maybe a cow. You laugh. Then you squint. Then you wonder if you've been cursed. Because in 13th century Europe, gold is gospel. Wealth must be seen, touched, and weighed. If it doesn't hurt your hip when you walk or make a satisfying thunk on the table, it isn't real. So when news spreads, mostly whispered and wildly exaggerated, that people in the East are using paper, actual paper, as money, you don't believe it. And if you do believe it, you assume it's some sort of dark sorcery. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a cozy couch or bunk bed somewhere across the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little storytelling caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Bruges, or Genoa, or Paris. The year is somewhere in the 1200s. You're wearing a tunic that itches slightly in the collar and smells vaguely of tallow. Your satchel is heavy with silver deniers or florins. You trust them. You've earned them. You can bite them. That's how you know they're real. But word is spreading. Across the known world, something strange is happening. In the far-off east, beyond Jerusalem, past the caravan routes of Persia, somewhere deep in the Mongol Empire, people are trading in slips of bark and ink instead of solid metal. And it's not just some fringe idea. Entire cities are apparently functioning on this magic system. You sit at a tavern table one evening, half drunk on watered wine, listening to a traveling merchant describe a place where money doesn't shine. He claims to have seen it with his own eyes, people paying for silk with paper stamped by a dragon seal. Others at the table scoff, accuse him of lying, or worse, being tricked by demons. Gold is the blood of kings, someone mutters, not the dust of trees. A priest at a nearby table crosses himself. This suspicion isn't just stubbornness. It's deeply cultural. In the West, the idea of money has always been tied to physical value. Roman coins still circulate in some towns. Silver mines in Saxony are considered state treasures. When kings want to show power, they issue new coins with their face, never mind the quality of the silver. Money is weight. It is metal. It is divine. Paper, by contrast, is seen as fragile, perishable, and dangerously mutable. You use it for prayers, maybe, or royal decrees. But to base an entire economy on it, that's like building a castle out of spiderwebs. Or worse, lies. Still, the rumors grow. Whispers from the Silk Road bring tales of Eastern efficiency. Merchants with pockets as light as feathers but purses as deep as oceans. In the Mongol cities, paper notes can be used to buy spices, horses, even concubines. Some say it's all enforced by the terrifying will of the Great Khan. Refuse the paper, and you lose your shop. Or your fingers. Or both. You hear one story about a Chinese merchant who tried to refuse a paper note from a Mongol soldier. The merchant vanished. His shop was burned. His family was sent to the provinces. Whether or not it's true doesn't matter. The myth is enough. Back in Europe, the reaction is somewhere between horrified fascination and full-blown panic. The learned class, what few of them there are, starts debating. Could something like this ever work here? A few suggest it could. But they're laughed out of guild halls and universities. After all, what backing does paper have? Who decides its value? And what stops anyone from printing more? Coins, at least, have the dignity of scarcity. If you melt them down, you still have silver. With paper, If the kingdom that prints it collapses, you're left with firewood. Or toilet paper, if you're feeling bold. You wonder, half seriously, if the East has simply gone mad. And yet, as you wrap your cloak tighter on a windy cobbled street, something about the idea lingers. It's not that it feels trustworthy, it doesn't. But it feels inevitable. The kind of strange shift that sneaks in under the floorboards and settles into the corners of life before anyone knows what's happened. Some scholars of the time call the idea alchemy without gold. Others suspect it's a trick played by clever rulers to separate peasants from their silver. A debt disguised as wealth, one merchant mutters to you as he sharpens a quill. Historians still argue whether this early European resistance was simple economic prudence or a deep cultural allergy to abstraction. Whatever the reason, the Western world isn't ready. But the seed is planted. You go to sleep that night thinking about bark turned to power, ink turned to influence. Somewhere in the distance, a storm is forming, not of thunder or wind, but of whispers, trades, and pieces of paper that might one day buy empires. You tighten your grip on your coin pouch. But somewhere deep inside, you wonder, how long will it last? You shuffle along the dusty edge of a Venetian quay, tugging your cloak tighter as the wind coming off the Adriatic slaps you with briny cold. Somewhere in the crowd, a tall, bright-eyed young man is returning from a trip so absurdly long and so absolutely unbelievable that you're not sure if you're meeting a traveler or a con artist. His name is Marco Polo, and he's back from China. You'd heard of him before, son of a merchant family, vanished eastward across the Silk Road with his father and uncle when you were still chasing stray chickens through the market square. Now, nearly a quarter century later, he steps ashore with calloused hands, sun-scorched skin, and stories, oh, the stories. And none more insane than this one. The great Khan of China, ruler of the Mongol Empire, uses paper money. Not sometimes. Not for emergencies. Always. For everything. You sit cross-legged in a stone-walled courtyard, a brazier crackling nearby, as Marco begins to tell it. His voice is smooth, his hands expressive, and his eyes shimmer with memories of places you can't even find on your maps. He describes it like a miracle. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, has replaced coins with square slips of mulberry bark paper, printed with official seals, engraved with elaborate scripts. Every citizen is required to accept them. Every merchant. Every farmer. Even the rich. The penalty for refusal? Execution. You nearly choke on your date-stuffed bread. Marco tells you how the notes come in different denominations, some worth more than others, and how government officials burn old notes every few years to prevent inflation. You can't believe your ears. Burn money? You sputter. On purpose? He nods. You wonder if he hit his head on the way back. But Marco is insistent. He's seen it work. In bustling cities like Kanbalik, modern-day Beijing, he watched entire markets thrive on paper alone. Traders from Persia, Arabia, and the steppes all using bark bills like they were gold. He even saw foreign ambassadors presenting paper money as gifts to the court. You prod him with questions. Is it always accepted? Can anyone forge it? What happens if the paper gets wet? Marco laughs. The Khan's seal, he says, is more feared than any bandit. Forgery is rare because the punishment is death, and not the quick kind. Something involving slicing. You don't ask for details. He even shows you a scrap he smuggled home. You lean in, awestruck. It's stiff but light, faded with age but still detailed. Elegant characters trail down like water. A red mark at the center pulses like an eye. You touch it. It doesn't feel like power. It feels like packaging. But the implications sink in like wine into wool. If this could work, if a state could compel belief in paper, what would it mean for Europe? You picture greedy kings, unstable popes, scheming nobles. Could they be trusted to wield this kind of magic? Your friend, a cloth merchant, scoffs. Too much trust required, he says. We trust coins because they don't lie. Metal is metal. You nod. The idea of your duke or bishop issuing promissory treebark notes makes your stomach twist. What's to stop them from printing more? What's to stop you from being robbed without a single thief in sight? Historians still argue whether Marco's tales were accepted as truth or passed off as exaggerated adventure yarns. Certainly, his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, would go on to inspire a flood of curiosity. But among your peers, the talk is mostly disbelief. A few scribes try to verify the claims, but there's little way to prove anything in a world where China might as well be Atlantis. Still, the tale spreads. In wine taverns, cathedrals, and counting houses, people begin whispering about paper money like it's a legend. Like dragons or philosopher's stones. Too absurd to be real, too persistent to ignore. One friar you know writes a letter to his bishop suggesting that Marco was either deluded by Eastern magics or perhaps possessed. Another believes it all and claims the East must have unlocked a secret form of Christian charity, wealth that doesn't corrupt. You nearly spit out your mead. But something about Marco's tone haunts you. He wasn't just repeating what he heard. He saw it, held it, used it, paid for a bowl of rice noodles with it, traveled a continent on it. That kind of confidence is hard to fake. You begin to wonder what it would feel like to walk through a city with nothing but a pouch of paper. No heavy coin bags. No counting or weighing. Just lightness. You also wonder what it would feel like to lose everything in a fire or flood. What happens to paper then? The local money changers are more curious than most. You hear whispers that a Florentine banker has begun sketching designs for a negotiable slip backed by his own vault of coin. Nothing official yet, just an idea. But still. The fact that someone's even considering it, that's new. You visit the Merchants' Guild one afternoon to find them arguing, red-faced and sweating. Some think paper money is inevitable. Others think it's the devil's parchment. Most just want lunch. You don't yet know that it'll be centuries before paper truly takes hold in Europe. But the gears are starting to turn. The great machine of history is lurching forward, one bark fiber rumor at a time. That night, you lay in your straw-stuffed mattress and imagine Marco again, kneeling before the great Khan, handing over a note, and receiving a velvet pouch of spices in return. It still seems impossible. But somehow, a little less so than yesterday. And you think, just before sleep takes you, if the East can bend reality with paper, what's stopping the West? You wake up to the church bells tolling across the rooftops, but your thoughts are still eastward. Paper money. You're trying to wrap your mind around it, like a goose trying to understand glass. And now, rumor has it the Mongols didn't just dabble in paper money, they forced an empire to believe in it. You're sipping bitter ale in a smoky hall when someone unrolls a tattered scroll, its ink smudged and words half legible. It's said to be a translation of a Chinese decree, centuries old. You're skeptical, but intrigued. The scroll reads like a royal thunderclap. All subjects of the great Khan must accept paper money, upon pain of death. So, there it is. The secret ingredient. Not belief, not trust. Power. You picture it now, a Mongol general, expression blank as winter sky, handing a merchant a rectangle of printed bark and daring him to say no. You imagine that merchant swallowing hard, then bowing low and nodding. Yes, of course, such noble paper. Who would question it? The paper itself wasn't just crude scribbles. The Yuan dynasty, under the direction of Kublai Khan, designed it with flair and formality. Notes were printed on mulberry bark paper, treated to resist wear, and marked with elaborate government seals. Each bore the official stamp of the state. That stamp wasn't just decorative, it was a declaration of faith backed by fear. You learn that the money was centralized. There were no rival mints, no rogue kingdoms issuing their own competing currency. All across the Mongol realm, from the banks of the Yellow River to the borders of Persia, one currency ruled, the Khan's paper. And here's the kicker, it worked. Merchants accepted it. Peasants used it. Entire cities ran on it. Not because everyone agreed on its value, but because the state made disagreement illegal. You hear of an edict in which those caught refusing paper currency were to be executed without trial. Charming. It wasn't just brutality that made it stick. The Mongols were logistical geniuses. Their couriers could outrun most armies, and their bureaucrats had more ink than some monasteries had wine. To maintain the system, they established a centralized monetary bureau, tracking the issue and expiration of notes. Old money was recalled and burned. New money issued. All of it meticulously documented. Well, mostly. You chuckle, imagining your own local baron trying to pull that off. He can barely keep his sheep out of the convent garden. Still, you can't deny the audacity. The great Khan essentially said, "This paper is worth something because I said so, and if you disagree, I'll end you." It's 1 part economic revolution, 2 parts existential threat. And, somehow, it held together. Now, you hear conflicting stories. Some say the Mongols were pragmatic, using paper money to grease the wheels of their sprawling empire. Others say it was a mind trick. If you could make people accept paper, you could make them accept anything. Historians still argue whether Kublai's real aim was economic unity or psychological control. One thing's certain, the system was both brilliant and brittle. You meet a ragged traveler who swears that during a famine, counterfeit notes flooded the western provinces. The penalties were harsh, public executions, branded faces, but the damage was done. For a while, trust wobbled. But then came the Khan's enforcers, swift as plague winds, and belief returned like a beaten dog. There's even a quirky anecdote you overhear in a sailor's tavern. During a Mongol embassy visit to Baghdad, one Chinese official paid for a shipment of carpets with paper notes. The local merchant accepted them out of fear. Later, he used them to start a fire. Whether the story is true or not, it captures the strange duality of the thing, currency or kindling, depending on your courage. Back home, in Europe, this all seems like high fantasy. Your town doesn't even have consistent coin weights. You once bought a goose for a button and a smile. How could such a complex system ever take root here? You wonder what would happen if your king tried to enforce such a policy. He might issue the notes. He might even try to compel acceptance. But who would trust them? And when famine hit or war erupted, as it always does, you know the notes would be stuffed into chamber pots or burned to keep babies warm. Still, the idea worms its way through your brain. You think about the merchants in the Mongol cities, light-footed, unburdened by heavy bags of coin. You think about how fast money could move, how much easier trade would be. And then, you think about your cousin, whose life savings were stolen by a highwayman last year. If that wealth had been on paper, could it have been traced? Cancelled? Reissued? There's an unsettling brilliance to the Mongol system. They controlled both the symbol and the belief. They minted not just currency, but trust, and they enforced it with swords. As you walk through the market that evening, the sound of metal coins clinking feels a little antiquated. You can't help but imagine what it would feel like to pull out a single note and have it by everything on your list. No weighing. No biting for purity. Just trust and transaction. But then again, you live in Europe. And here, we don't trust what we can't touch. Yet. You're standing in your uncle's apothecary shop, fingers idly brushing jars of dried nettle, powdered oyster shell, and something labeled mumia, which you've been told is ground-up Egyptian corpses, don't ask. Behind you, Two customers argue over whether a silver coin from Naples is worth the same as a Venetian ducat. You sigh. The answer depends on the weather, the mood of the merchant, and whether the coin's been clipped by a bored nun. This is daily life in 13th century Europe. A swamp of confusing coinage. There's no single currency, just dozens of local ones. Each duchy, bishopric, city-state, and drunken minor noble mints its own coins, with different sizes, metals, weights, and purities. Money is local, inconsistent, and unreliable. What's accepted in Paris might get you thrown out of a tavern in Bruges. And here's the kicker, even the coins themselves lie. Take the infamous practice of clipping. You know it well. People shave thin slices of silver from the edges of coins, then pass off the lighter coins like they're still full weight. Meanwhile, those silver shavings get melted down and sold or reminted, sometimes illegally. You tried clipping once, when you were younger. You were terrible at it. Got caught. Got slapped by your aunt. Never tried again. Then there's debasement, a charming trick where kings and city councils quietly reduce the precious metal content in their coins but pretend nothing's changed. The coin looks the same, feels the same, but it's less silver, more filler. It's like watering down wine and hoping no one notices. They always notice. As a result, trust is fragile. You've seen bakers reject coins that smell funny or weigh a hair less than they should. Merchants bite coins, listen to them clink, even throw them on the ground to test their ring. Your neighbor, a barrel maker, insists he can tell a bad florin just by how cold it feels. That seems questionable, but you nod politely. So now, you begin to see the madness of it all. In Europe, coinage is both anchor and chaos. It slows commerce, fuels fraud, and ties every transaction to metallurgy and suspicion. Contrast that with the strange, otherworldly simplicity of Marco's paper money. Uniform notes. No weighing. No clipping. No haggling over fineness. You hate to admit it, but the Mongols had a point. Still, your fellow Europeans are a skeptical bunch. You pass by a cathedral sermon where the local priest calls paper money a sorcerer's trick. He waves a parchment at the congregation, shouting, "Would you sell your cow for this? This dry leaf? This lie?" The crowd grumbles approval. Someone throws a turnip. You step back. Yet, ironically, Europe's obsession with accounting is starting to plant tiny seeds in the cracks of that skepticism. Florentine bankers, especially the Bardi and Peruzzi families, have begun using bills of exchange, a kind of promissory note that functions like a check. It's not currency, exactly, but it lets merchants move money across borders without carrying gold. You hear tales of a merchant handing over a bill in Genoa and collecting coin in Constantinople. A sort of abstract wealth. Trust-based. Paper-based. There's even a quirky little system in the Champagne fairs, those rowdy, sprawling trade festivals in northern France, where international merchants settle debts with letters and tallies, not coins. It works. Mostly. But always, in the end, someone wants real silver. Historians still argue whether Europe's growing use of bills of exchange was inspired directly by Chinese paper money or simply a parallel invention born from necessity. Either way, something is shifting. You feel it in the air, in the ledgers, in the worried looks of money changers who now ask twice if you'd like a receipt. But this paper proxy system still lives in the shadows. Common folk don't trust it. Royal courts don't recognize it. And your baker laughs when someone tries to pay for a loaf with a promissory note. If it ain't jingle, it ain't real, he says. Then chews loudly on a walnut. The few early European thinkers who dream of official paper currency face overwhelming resistance. The church warns of fraud and false value. Nobles worry they'll lose control over their mints. And the common people? They just want something they can hold, drop, chew, or bite. You try to explain Marco Polo's paper tales to a monk you know, Father Edric, a man of quiet skepticism and even quieter farts. He listens politely, stroking his beard, then mutters, "Sounds like heresy." Or performance art. He goes back to copying scripture. But even Father Edric has started tallying debts with charcoal marks on parchment. Even he is inching, without realizing it, toward abstraction. One evening, you help your merchant cousin tally sales in his ledger. He's begun tracking transactions in multiple currencies, and new this year, he's added a column for notes due. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. People are getting used to writing their promises down, he says. Who knows? Someday we might not even need the coin. You laugh. Then pause. Because, for a moment, you believe him. It's a weird sensation, believing in something that doesn't yet exist. A Europe where money isn't heavy, dirty, or jingling. Where value lives in ink, not metal. A Europe that trusts paper. But not yet. You're still in a world where bankers wear chainmail under their robes and merchants carry daggers alongside their coin purses. You return home that night with a handful of clipped coins, a pocket full of suspicion, and a creeping curiosity you can't shake. What if, just maybe, the future is already rustling quietly in the pages of a ledger? It's the middle of the night, and you're lying awake, staring at the wooden beams of your ceiling, listening to the creaks of the wind pressing against the shutters. Your brain, of course, is still tangled in the paper chase. Not the kind with quills and scrolls, no, you're fixated on the delicate dance between power, paper, and belief. You think back to an odd little story you heard once about a North African trader who accepted paper money in Beijing, traveled halfway back across Asia, and then found that no one west of Samarkand would take it. The note, once potent as gold, turned into expensive kindling. Paper, it turns out, is only money if everyone agrees to the story. And stories? They're fickle. So now, you start asking a dangerous question. How does something become money? Coins have weight. They gleam. They clink with authority. But paper, it whispers. It relies on a delicate mesh of trust, enforcement, and infrastructure. And in 13th century Europe, none of that exists yet. Let's start with the trust part. Trust, in this context, means that when someone hands you a piece of paper and says it's worth 5 goats, you nod and believe them. That trust has to stretch across towns, across classes, even across languages. It requires systems of verification, fraud prevention, and shared cultural rituals. You glance around your village and know instantly that you're not there yet. People still think thunder is divine punishment and that owls bring death. You doubt they'll be ready for fiat currency. Then there's enforcement. The Mongols had it easy, in a twisted way. They could nail a few heads to some gates and poof, compliance. But in Europe, fragmented as it is, with popes and kings and mayors all vying for authority, there's no central force strong enough to mandate paper money. Even if one prince tried, a neighboring bishop would undercut him, mint a rival token, and declare his rival excommunicated. Imagine the chaos: Florence printing paper bills, Milan rejecting them, Genoa forging them, and Venice pretending none of it's happening. It's not a currency system. It's an episode of medieval reality television. And then there's infrastructure, maybe the trickiest of all. Printing presses? Not here. Not yet. Ink is precious. Paper is expensive, often imported, and mostly used for legal contracts or letters to far-off bishops. It's certainly not ready for mass financial production. You've seen scribes spend half a day on a single page. At that rate, a national currency would take several centuries to launch. So how did China pull it off? You recall Marco's breathless accounts of printing shops churning out notes with wooden blocks, vast warehouses storing currency like grain, tax systems operating entirely in paper. You imagine bureaucrats bent over desks, rubber stamping notes in triplicate, while somewhere a Mongol archer stands watch just in case someone gets cheeky. The Chinese had central government, consistent bureaucracy, sophisticated roads, and a long tradition of civil service. Europe, meanwhile, is a patchwork quilt, tattered, loud, and frequently on fire. Even the few proto-banking cities like Florence or Bruges rely on a mixture of gold reserves, merchant guilds, and old-fashioned elbow-squeezing negotiations. Their power is mercantile, not imperial. And they don't have paper factories tucked behind city walls. Yet. You pass a workshop where a scribe is experimenting with a watermill-driven stamping device, a crude attempt at mass replication. It's slow, messy, and breaks constantly. But it's progress. You ask him what it's for. He says, debt records. The church is drowning in IOUs. You raise an eyebrow. Debt as a driver of paper. Well. Quirk of the week. A rumor spreads that some nobles in Catalonia are testing a local sheep note, a document certifying ownership of livestock, tradable at the fair. It's not currency exactly, but it smells awfully close. And yes, it probably does smell like sheep. Some merchants are also experimenting with tally sticks, wooden rods notched with values, then split into two matching halves. The king keeps one, the lender the other. It's a clever fraud-resistant system, but still deeply physical. Yet, it points in the direction of abstract trust. Historians still argue whether these tally sticks were primitive IOUs or the earliest form of state-backed paper instruments. Either way, it's clear that the concept of symbolic value is not foreign to Europe. The real block is scale. You picture what it would take for paper money to actually happen here. Not just one prince's whim, but a coordinated system, consistent paper production, anti-counterfeiting measures, government backing, merchant buy-in, and most of all, belief. And who, in this holy mess of borders and banners, could enforce that belief? The church? Maybe. They already issue indulgences, parchments that supposedly forgive sin in exchange for coin. People believe in those. But tying the value of money to salvation sounds like a theological nightmare waiting to happen. The crown? Depends on which one. France is broke. England is fighting everyone. The Holy Roman Emperor spends more time being excommunicated than governing. Not exactly pillars of monetary stability. So, for now, Europe remains a clinking, jingling, fraud-riddled soup of coinage. But the whispers are there. The tickling, annoying, paper-laced whispers of a new kind of money. You sigh and roll over. The cat at your feet snorts softly in its sleep. Somewhere in China, a farmer is paying taxes with a mulberry note. Somewhere in Venice, a merchant is writing a bill of exchange. Somewhere in Paris, a monk is copying a treatise on trust. And here you are, caught between two worlds. The old one you can touch, and the new one still just a rumor, a rustling thought, a piece of paper waiting to be believed. The sun has barely broken the horizon, casting that warm, golden spill across the cobblestones as you make your way to the city square. You've been summoned not by royal decree, but by curiosity. A merchant caravan has arrived from the east, and the gossip is already flying thicker than the pigeons. They say they carry something strange, something light, flat, and powerful. You wedge yourself into the crowd, wedged between a butcher with garlic on his breath and a weaver clutching a baby goat. At the center of the square, surrounded by crates and colorful cloth, stands an aging man in a silk tunic. His name is Pietro, and though his accent flutters uncertainly between Genos and something more exotic, you catch the glint of experienced mischief in his eyes. He holds up a square of paper. This, he says, is worth 5 bolts of fine Chinese silk. The crowd laughs. One man shouts, "I've got some toilet scrapings worth a castle in Milan." Then, but Pietro doesn't flinch. "This paper," he continues, comes from the Yuan dynasty, the Khan's own treasury. It's backed by imperial decree and the punishment of death. You can buy horses, food, lodging, favors. It holds real power. He passes the note around. You get your hands on it for a second, light as a feather, smooth like pressed linen, inked with foreign characters and red stamps. It smells faintly of cinnamon. You squint at it. It doesn't feel like money. It feels like a riddle. Europeans are not amused. A scholar in the crowd insists it's an elaborate con. A baker nearby asks how you'd make change. A young apprentice whispers, "What if it gets wet?" And several people nod solemnly. Water is, apparently, the nemesis of this financial revolution. But Pietro doesn't care. He grins, sells his spices and bolts of silk using European coin, and quietly hands out a few notes as souvenirs to the boldest onlookers. "You'll thank me in 20 years, he says with a wink. You follow him after the crowd disperses. He lets you walk with him a while. Is it true, you ask? Do people really use this in China? Like coins? More than coins, he says. They use it for taxes, for paying soldiers, even in gambling dens. It's accepted everywhere. Because people believe it. Because the emperor says so. And because it works." You frown. "But how do you know it's real?" Pietro chuckles. "Same way you trust a gold coin. Someone powerful guarantees it. The difference is, paper is lighter. And the penalty for counterfeiting? Let's just say the Mongols don't bother with prison cells." You walk in silence for a bit, watching him finger a folded note in his sleeve. He says it's worth more than most city houses. You believe him, kind of. As you part ways, he leaves you with a final thought. One day, Europe will catch up. Maybe not in my lifetime. But money doesn't have to clink to be real. The idea sits in your chest like a stone, or maybe a seed. Later that week, you find yourself in a counting house in Bruges. A banker named Allard, bald, intense, terrifyingly sober, shows you a different kind of financial magic. He's not holding paper bills from the East. No, he's showing you ledgers. Pages upon pages of transactions, credits, debits, obligations stretching between cities. Allard explains that letters of credit now allow merchants to travel without carrying coin at all. You can deposit money in Florence, receive a slip of paper, and then collect your funds in London. The system works because merchant families trust each other and enforce debts with social pressure, family alliances, and the occasional broken kneecap. You ask if he's heard of the Chinese money. He nods, but dismisses it. Too centralized, he says. Too risky. If the emperor falls, your paper becomes fireplace stuffing. But it works, you argue. He shrugs. So does feudalism. Until it doesn't. Still, his ledgers look suspiciously like the beginnings of a paper economy, albeit a carefully cloistered one, guarded by bankers, not governments. Historians still argue whether this burgeoning financial class was secretly laying the groundwork for paper money, if their obsession with documentation, abstraction, and trust-based instruments prefigured Europe's slow embrace of fiat currency. Some say yes. Others say it's a happy coincidence. Either way, you can see the gears starting to turn. Quirky side note, in nearby Ghent, a guild of fishmongers starts issuing hand-signed fish credits. Literal stinking paper. They promise to pay the bearer in herring at the next fair. It's weirdly popular, though someone complains the notes absorb the smell. You don't envy their wallets. More importantly, a few city-states are experimenting with municipal bonds, official IOUs sold to citizens to fund local wars, walls, or drainage projects. These bonds can be traded. And they're printed. Printed. Not in high volume, but enough to make you pause. You visit one printer in Florence who's devised a rudimentary stamp to emboss city seals onto parchment. It's faster than scribes, he says proudly. If the council accepts it, we might start printing tax slips. Paper. Taxes. Trade. It's all starting to swirl together like storm clouds. And yet, no one is calling it money. Not yet. You close your eyes one night, imagining 2 stacks of value, a clinking, grimy pile of coin on your left, and a crisp, light sheaf of stamped, promising parchment on your right. One is heavy and real. The other is fragile, but feels like the future. You wake up one morning to the sound of bells somewhere. A market is opening, a guild is gathering, a baker is either dying or getting married. It's hard to tell with bells. You sit up slowly, already thinking about what you overheard yesterday at the apothecary. A Venetian merchant swearing up and down that he'd sold 30 crates of pepper in Alexandria using only a slip of paper. No gold. No silver. Just ink on parchment. He called it a bill of exchange, and you weren't alone in pretending to understand what that meant. So today, you're off to Venice. And if your feet are sore from walking, don't worry, the gondola isn't much better. It rocks like a cradle, the gondolier hums something off-key, and the canals smell like brine and regret. But Venice is where paper pretends to be gold, so you're here for the performance. You find the merchant, eventually. His name is Lorenzo, and he looks exactly like someone who wears debt like a perfume, well-dressed, confident, perpetually sweating. You ask about his pepper deal. He doesn't flinch. I deposited 500 florins with a banker in Venice, he says, licking olive oil from his thumb. He gave me a bill. Took it to Alexandria. Cashed it with a partner bank. Pepper acquired. No pirates, no bribes, no backaches from hauling coin. It sounds like a magic trick, and in a way, it is. You learn quickly, this isn't currency in the way you're used to. It's a promise, a formal, documented, bank-backed promise that moves faster than gold and doesn't jingle. And even better, it doesn't tempt bandits. These bills of exchange are spreading. Genoa, Florence, Lubeck, Bruges, they're becoming the language of international trade. Merchants trust them. Courts uphold them. Banks profit from them. Still, most peasants think it's alchemy. So here's the paradox. Europe already uses paper as money. They just don't admit it. Because the moment you call it money, it threatens the whole religious and social framework. Money is supposed to be metal, earthly, tangible, God-given. Paper. Paper is man's slippery invention. And worse, it can lie. Which is why the church stays twitchy about the whole thing. You attend a sermon in Bologna where a bishop thunders against phantom gold and Satan's accounting. He doesn't name bills directly, but everyone knows who he's yelling about. After the service, you overhear 3 monks debating whether a paper IOU counts as usury. They don't agree. One suggests writing to the Pope. The other 2 tell him not to be such a narc. This tension isn't new. In fact, one of the most whispered about clashes in 13th century Europe is the growing friction between commerce and piety. Some historians argue this tension delayed the rise of true paper money. Others think it forced paper to evolve in secrecy, cloaked in terms like note, bill, tally, or bond. Whatever the case, you see the duality now. On one hand, there's gold and silver, blessed, minted, universally respected. On the other, there's this paper, faster, lighter, but suspiciously clever. You attend a city council meeting in Florence. The guilds are debating a proposal to issue city-backed promissory notes for trade. A butcher's representative worries it'll turn coin into gossip. A banker argues it'll attract foreign investors. A carpenter just wants someone to fix the road outside his shop. Democracy at its finest. They don't pass the measure, not yet. But the mere fact that they're talking about it sends a shiver down your spine. You've heard a blacksmith in Milan is already accepting stamped municipal notes. A tailor in Lübeck offered a 2% discount if you paid in bonded paper rather than coin. Change isn't knocking, it's rattling the door. And now, the quirky bit. In a Parisian tavern, you spot something odd. The tavern owner, a stout woman named Beatrix, is letting regulars keep running tabs. Not unusual. But she's writing them on waxed parchment, stamped with her seal. Customers can carry their own drinking credits to nearby shops who trust Beatrix's word. They're literally passing notes to buy beer and bread. You ask her if she thinks it's money. She laughs. It's promises, love. And in this town, my promise is worth more than the king's. Maybe she's not wrong. You return to Venice by week's end and notice something different this time. On the Rialto Bridge, a money changer displays a new placard. We now accept bills from Pisa and Florence, 10% fee. You blink. He's not just exchanging coin anymore, he's arbitraging trust. Historians still argue whether this moment, these overlapping, informal, makeshift systems, mark the true beginning of paper money in Europe. There's no decree, no grand unveiling. Just countless small decisions, little bets, quiet revolutions in ledger ink. It doesn't feel like one big bang. It feels like a slow, stubborn seep. You sit beside the Grand Canal that evening, watching gondolas drift by in the amber light. Somewhere, someone is paying someone with nothing but a signature and a name. And maybe, just maybe, that's all money ever really is. You're getting used to this now, the quiet shuffle of ink over coin, of parchment over purse. It's subtle, like a magician's sleight of hand, but the trick is happening right in front of you, again and again. You see it in taverns, on bridges, at markets. Paper isn't replacing money yet, but it's whispering that maybe it could. Today, you're headed north. Lübeck, to be exact, queen of the Hanseatic League and one of the most organized trade powers in all of Europe. If Venice was paper's flirtation, Lübeck might be its awkward first date. As you cross the rain-slicked port, crates thud down from a Baltic cog. Tar, grain, salted herring. The smell hits you like a punch in the teeth. But here, trade is life. And with trade comes paperwork, tons of it. You duck into the contour, the nerve center of Hanseatic activity. It's less opulent than Venetian banks, but just as obsessive. Clerks scurry past you with slates and scrolls. On a long wooden table, 3 merchants argue over figures, waving ink-stained slips like swords. You recognize them immediately, bills of lading. These are shipping documents, paper proof of what was loaded where, when, and by whom. They're not technically money, but they're being traded like it. One merchant just handed over a lading bill to secure a shipment of rye. No coin exchanged. Just proof. When you ask about it, one clerk shrugs. If I trust the cargo will arrive, why not use the promise to buy something else? His tone is casual, but his eyes are sharp. These people are building something dangerous, a trade ecosystem fueled by belief. You learn the Hanseatic League already operates on standardized accounting ledgers between cities. Sometimes, instead of hauling coin across land and sea, merchants send messages. This man is owed. Credit this firm. Debts cleared. It's all letters, notes, numbers. One parchment equals a shipment of wool. Another secures a debt from Danzig. Another is tied to a series of loans being juggled between Bergen, Riga, and Bruges. It's like a spiderweb of trust strung out over thousands of miles, and not a single gold coin in sight. Here's the twist. Much of this is happening without official currency. No royal seal. No state treasury. No central bank. Just merchants, shipping clerks, and a bunch of people who really don't want to get stiffed. You stop for a pint in a dockside tavern and hear about a sailor who tried to forge a fake lading note for a phantom cargo of timber. He's now scrubbing hulls in exile, which is the 13th century version of being ghosted by the economy. But the scandal is still buzzing because it reveals a deeper anxiety. This whole system works because no one cheats too badly. Trust, not treasure, is the currency here. And paper, flexible, abstract, and painfully forgeable, is both the hero and the villain. A merchant from Tallinn tells you over sour beer, "I'd rather have paper from Lübeck than silver from Krakow." Paper doesn't melt on the road. He pauses. Unless it rains. Quirky detail time. In Stockholm, you hear about an enterprising priest who started printing prayer slips with indulgence credits, sin vouchers, basically. Locals start trading them like moral currency. One baker exchanges 3 minor sins for a smoked eel. Another brags he got drunk for free because he carried a bishop's signed slip. The church gets wind and shuts it down, but not before someone tries to pin the first confessional loan crisis. You walk away with the slip. It says, "One forgiveness, valid through Advent." Fr. Olaf. Back in Lübeck, you visit a warehouse where goods are stacked to the ceiling, each bundle tagged with a parchment note. The manager explains that buyers rarely inspect the goods themselves anymore. They buy the tag. As long as the seal is intact, the paper is the cargo. You watch as one man hands over 5 honey slips to another, who then trades them for a smaller pile of iron slips with a different merchant. No one opens a crate. No one touches the goods. Paper has become proxy, placeholder, and proxy again. Historians still argue whether this was the tipping point when paper stopped being just a record of value and started being treated as value itself. Some claim this is proto-fiat currency. Others say it's too wrapped in goods and guarantees to count. But either way, it's clear, Europe has started to believe in the note. And belief, as you've noticed, is a currency of its own. You leave Lübeck on a foggy morning, paper tucked inside your sleeve. Not gold, not silver, just words and weightless worth. Somewhere behind you, a scribe sharpens his quill. Somewhere ahead, a merchant calculates profits on a blank piece of vellum. And somewhere in the middle, you, just a little sleepier, a little more convinced, realize that this paper thing, it's not going away. The morning finds you in Florence, and this city does not ease into the day, it bursts. Bells, boots, gossip, goats. You sidestep an argument over the price of onions and nearly get trampled by a banker's assistant who's late to an audit. And somehow, everyone here is still better dressed than you. Florence hums with numbers. You don't just smell fresh bread in the air, you smell accounting. This is a city built on the ledger. Gold florins clink in pockets, yes, but you'll soon find that it's the absence of coin, the invisible wealth scrawled onto parchment, that truly runs things. You wander into the back offices of the Bardi family bank. No one stops you. It seems if you look vaguely exhausted and carry a scrap of parchment, you belong. A clerk offers you a seat beside a massive ledger, already half filled with today's transactions. Debits, credits, interest rates, all written in neat columns like tiny, obsessive poems. Then you see it, a lettera di cambio, a bill of exchange. It's been folded 6 times, bears the seal of 2 cities, and is worth more than the building you're sitting in. You ask the clerk if it's money. He laughs. It's better. It survives travel. That's the key, you realize. Florence isn't just inventing paper money, it's inventing the infrastructure for paper money. Standardized contracts. Bank partnerships across cities. Double-entry bookkeeping. A web of trust written entirely in ink. You head to a nearby tailor, just to test a theory. You hand him a bill of exchange you borrowed from a merchant friend. He squints, checks the city seals, then nods. "Come back next week," he says. "I'll have your tunic ready." You never even discussed the price. This is the rise of credit as culture. Not just a tool of commerce, but a way of living. Everyone is owed something, everyone owes someone, and it's all tracked by paper. Florence, along with Genoa and Venice, has become a nerve center for this credit-based system. Merchants, bankers, nobles, even church officials now operate under a logic of deferred payment. You don't need gold if your reputation is gold. You don't need cash when your name buys more than coin. And here's the quirky bit. You discover an underground poetry group that only accepts entry via promissory note. Yes, a poetry club. The host, a wiry man with ink stains on his collar, tells you that cash is too bourgeois. You either write a verse or show proof of creditworthiness. One drunk friar pays with a bakery debt, and it somehow works. You return to the Bardi offices and sit in on a dispute. A merchant claims he was underpaid on a shipment to Bruges. His opponent insists the bill of exchange was adjusted due to delays at port. The room goes silent. Then a notary pulls out a carbon-stained vellum scroll, the original contract. Everyone leans in. And it hits you. Paper is law. It remembers. It holds people accountable. Unlike coin, it doesn't vanish down a well or under a mattress. It's traceable. It speaks. Historians still argue whether this paper-based banking system was Europe's first taste of fiat currency. After all, these bills and notes are not directly backed by metal, they're backed by institutional trust. A Bardi or Peruzzi signature is worth more than a bar of silver, if only because people agree it is. And that agreement, that collective faith, that's the real alchemy. Still, it's not all smooth sailing. You learn of a scandal involving counterfeit Florentine bills. A forger created false merchant seals and nearly sank a local guild. The fallout was ugly: bankruptcies, duels, and one very creative punishment involving public accounting recitations. 4 months afterward, city criers were instructed to read official debt ledgers aloud in the piazza. Nothing says shame like having your balance sheet shouted at sunrise. But Florence adapts. It institutes stricter seal standards, hires more notaries, and, most tellingly, expands its banking schools. That's right, they're now teaching people how to navigate paper-based finance. Interest calculations, debt chaining, even forgery detection. Children learn fractions using imaginary loans. The future, it seems, will be written in columns and carried in pockets. You sip wine with a minor noble who insists the next pope will be chosen based on his balance sheet. You laugh, but only a little. Because by now, you've seen the shift. Coin may still rule the streets, but paper rules the rooms where it's decided how and where the coin will flow. So you walk into the Florentine dusk, bill of exchange folded neatly in your sleeve, and think, this city doesn't just accept paper money. It believes in it. You ride west, a creaky wagon trundling toward the edge of Christendom, where castles tilt over misty hills and people still swear by saints more than bankers. You're in rural France now, Auvergne or maybe Burgundy, where cows outnumber clerks and the world moves with the pace of a stubborn mule. But even out here, away from the city-states and coastal powerhouses, something strange is happening. Paper is leaking into places it was never meant to go. Farmers, monks, traveling minstrels, all of them clutching slips, notes, or scribbled promises. It's messy, improvised, a little ridiculous. And exactly why it matters. Your first stop is a roadside monastery. The abbot greets you with a handshake and a scroll. It's a land grant written on parchment, inked with Latin that's either biblical or bureaucratic, it's hard to tell. This particular note entitles the bearer to 2 oxen, 5 hens, and seasonal use of a local well. You can trade it, the abbot says with a grin. If someone's that desperate for chickens, you blink. It's not currency, but it is portable value. And sure enough, at the village tavern, you hear a butcher offering salted pork in exchange for 1 well voucher and a few egg notes. You watch a deal unfold using 4 scraps of paper, no coin in sight, and a chicken that may or may not be alive. Welcome to the countryside, where paper is Play-Doh and no one reads the fine print. A traveling merchant tells you he carries over 24 local scripts, tax waivers, harvest shares, IOUs, loan deferrals. He pulls them out like a gambler revealing cards. Each one is technically worthless anywhere else, but in the right village, they're as good as gold. Sometimes better, since people trust neighbors more than kings. You stumble into a marketplace in Tours where a fishmonger hands a schoolteacher a paper chitty labeled apples pending. The teacher nods. "Tell Jean I said hi." Deal done. These notes are often informal, but they mimic real money, transferable, signed, even interest-bearing, depending on local arrangements. You find a smith who issues credit slips to regular customers. "Pay later," he says, or barter me stories instead. He's proud of one, a limerick that paid for a new horseshoe. Quirky tidbit. In a nearby hamlet, you hear about a cat note. Apparently, one woman pledged a future litter of kittens as partial payment for a loom repair. The note was passed around as novelty currency for weeks until, inevitably, someone tried to redeem it. The kittens had already run away. Chaos ensued. The cat note was officially voided. But this isn't just countryside silliness, it's adaptation. Without strong banking institutions or standard coin circulation, people invent their own systems. And paper, even the unofficial kind, makes trade easier, memory longer, and promises harder to break. Yet problems arise. You find a feud between two villages over a batch of forged vineyard notes. One side accuses the other of inflating value, claiming their grape credits were only good for watered-down wine. Things escalated into what locals call the wine note war. It ended when both mayors were locked in the church cellar until they agreed on a conversion rate. Historians still argue whether these rural paper systems count as legitimate protocurrency or just eccentric barter tools. Some see them as foundational, a grassroots financial literacy movement before Europe knew what to call it. Others dismiss them as temporary fads, bound to fail once coins came clinking back into fashion. But walking these dusty roads, you get the sense that something deeper is at play. Out here, paper is about relationships, not institutions. It's tied to people, to faces, to trust that goes deeper than seal or stamp. A miller shows you a crumpled note signed only with a thumbprint. "That's Philippe," he says. "He never forgets his debts." You nod. You believe him. In one village, they've gone full paper economy, weekly wages issued in notes, markets using slips, even tithes to the church written on parchment. The priest calls it grace by ledger. You're not sure how the Pope feels about that. Still, as the sun sets, you pass a roadside stand where a boy offers roasted chestnuts in exchange for a laundry credit his mother scribbled on a scrap of linen. The ink is smudged. The handwriting's awful. But it works. And that's the point. Because even in the muddiest parts of Europe, far from Florentine vaults or Venetian ports, paper is proving itself. Not by order of kings. Not by decree. But by sheer, stubborn human creativity. You're on the move again, and now the road curves east into the fractal chaos of the Holy Roman Empire, where every hill has a prince, every river a custom tax, and no two coins weigh the same. Territories, duchies, city-states each with its own laws, lords, and currency quirks. It's like wandering through a patchwork quilt where every square shouts in a different dialect and insists it's the real Germany. Yet somehow, paper is trying to sew it all together. You arrive in Nuremberg, where merchants have developed a survival skill that feels less like accounting and more like mental gymnastics. Every transaction here requires translating coinage values, political allegiances, and seasonal taxes. It's exhausting. So, predictably, they've turned to something easier to carry, paper. Specifically, letters of credit, the financial passport of the medieval merchant. You watch a fur trader flash one at a toll bridge guard, who reads it carefully, nods, and waves him through without asking for coin. The letter simply says the bearer is good for 10 silver marks on the books of a Frankfurt bank. The guard trusts it. Or maybe he just doesn't want to argue. This is where things get really meta. The letter itself isn't money. It's not backed by gold, silver, or even a promise to pay right now. It's backed by access. If the right people agree to accept the letter, it becomes a temporary currency. You meet a broker who deals in nothing but paper. He never touches coin. His entire operation is moving credit between cities, converting paper promises from one language or seal system into another. He shows you a drawer filled with folded slips, each bearing different marks: Cologne, Mainz, Augsburg. It's like a medieval stock portfolio, but messier and with more wax. And that wax, it matters. The broker tells you seals are everything. A familiar crest can make a note 5 times more valuable. A smudged one? Worthless. You ask if anyone ever checks the truth behind the promises. He laughs. Not if it keeps working. Still, not everyone is thrilled. You hear a goldsmith in Erfurt ranting about worthless parchment flooding the market. His old school measures value by weight and clink. He shows you a coin with dents and tarnish and says, "That's real. That lasts." But even he accepts a letter of credit from a frequent customer, though he mutters about it for 10 full minutes afterward. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In Strasbourg, a group of artisans created their own paper labor chits, mini contracts proving hours worked. These were traded among guild members and even used to buy beer. One especially popular chit read, 2 days carpentry, redeemable for 1 goose or 3 ales. It was so well circulated that the original carpenter forgot who owed him the goose. You find more improvisation in Frankfurt, where festival organizers issue printed fare vouchers in advance of the spring market. These are sold ahead of time to guarantee stalls and buy goods later. You overhear a juggler trying to pay his in-bill with a voucher marked for 1 barrel of mead, valid only on festival day. The innkeeper accepts it after verifying the juggler's reputation with 3 clowns and a beekeeping nun. But even as paper spreads, the cracks begin to show. In Regensburg, a merchant collapses after learning that a letter of credit he trusted was based on phantom funds, a shell account in a city that never issued it. His whole operation collapses. You see apprentices tear down signs, customers argue over unpaid debts, and creditors storm his house waving worthless scrolls. Historians still debate whether this was fraud or just a misunderstanding caused by overlapping jurisdictions. Some call it early paper speculation, others a classic liquidity crisis. But either way, the damage is real. The Holy Roman Empire's fractured structure means no one can regulate paper's growth or fix its collapse. A city might honor a bill, the next town over might laugh in your face. It's financial whiplash. Yet the momentum continues. In Mainz, you meet a merchant whose pockets are stuffed with nothing but folded notes. "I haven't touched silver in months," he says proudly. "And I've never been richer." He tells you about a recent deal where 5 merchants, across 4 cities, each traded a different kind of paper. No coin moved. No goods were touched. Just paper, passing from hand to hand, like a card trick everyone wants to believe in. It worked. Somehow. You ride out through a fog-draped valley, passing a ragged trader holding a sign, buying parchment debts, any seal considered. He waves as you pass, a little too eagerly. And as night falls over this strange, fragmented empire, you realize something. Even in a land where nothing matches, flags, weights, laws, paper has found a way to move. Because paper isn't about matching. It's about meaning. The journey bends north now, toward the chillier winds of the Low Countries, Bruges, Ghent, Antwerp, places where the land itself seems borrowed from the sea, and where the people have turned trade into both a religion and a game. Here, paper doesn't just circulate, it performs. You arrive in Bruges just as the market opens, and it's like stumbling into a Renaissance stock exchange. Shouts echo across the square, names, weights, prices, promises, and more paper flapping in the breeze than a monk's laundry line. You dodge a goose and end up behind a fish stall where a young clerk is scribbling notes faster than he can breathe. He's not pricing the fish. He's recording loans. Because here's the thing about the Low Countries, they've made everything financial. Goods, space, time, even future goods, they're all tied to credit and speculation. One stall owner tells you he's already sold next month's barrel of salted herring. He holds up a folded slip, grinning. Haven't caught the fish yet. But it's paid for. That's the game now, betting on futures. And the tool of choice. Not silver. Not gold. Paper. You spot something new in this marketplace. Paper notes changing hands rapidly. Not just between buyer and seller, but between buyers and other buyers. A man accepts a note for cheese, then immediately trades it to another merchant for cloth. You blink. You just watched a form of early secondary trading. It's subtle, a little improvised, but unmistakable. These people are building something beyond barter, beyond coinage. They're building a system of liquidity. And you're just getting started. A wealthy widow in Ghent lets you browse her folio of assets, a small book of credit slips, bills of exchange, long-term rent guarantees, and yes, several local merchant notes. She's not just living on paper, she's investing with it. She leans close and whispers, "My husband left me debt. I turned it into income." You want to high-five her, but settle for a respectful nod. Still, cracks lurk beneath the varnish. You sit in on a town meeting where guildsmen argue over a shoemaker's refusal to honor a year-old payment note. He claims the issuing merchant no longer exists. Others accuse him of profiting from the note's rise in value. You hear the word bubble whispered, though no one seems quite sure what it means yet. Then someone pulls out a ledger. And suddenly the room goes quiet. Because in these towns, ledgers are gospel. If the note was recorded, it's real. If it's not, well, may your cow give sour milk forever. Your quirky moment comes when you attend a dinner party in Antwerp where all the dishes are themed around trade items. There's cinnamon soup, saffron rice, sugar-roasted duck, and the host pays for it all with a bundle of spice-backed promissory notes. At one point, he raises a toast to the divine power of paperwork, then promptly spills wine on his own inventory sheet. And this is the weird truth. The Low Countries are making paper money cool. In Bruges, artists decorate notes with hand-drawn seals and floral patterns. Some even rhyme. You see one promissory note that begins, "If this you hold, and I have gold, you'll get your sum when days grow cold." A financial haiku. Kids play with fake bills. Shopkeepers hang framed notes from wealthy clients, not for value but for status. A baker tells you proudly that he once received a payment from the mayor in paper. She's since died, but he still keeps the note, like an autograph. Historians still argue whether this was a proto-bourgeois obsession with status, or simply a practical adaptation to crowded cities and rapid trade. Either way, the effect is real. Paper doesn't just function here. It lives. Still, not all is rosy. You pass a huddled group near the docks, merchants murmuring about runaway bills, notes that lost value after a ship carrying pledged goods sank. There's panic. One man sold his home for a slip that's now worthless. Another refuses to eat, convinced his spice futures are cursed. It's a reminder that belief in paper, while powerful, can also break. One whisper, one shipwreck, one broken seal, and the system wobbles. You talk to a scribe tasked with updating merchant ledgers daily. He shows you 3 versions of the same transaction, each slightly different. They call it clerical discretion. he says with a smirk. I call it paper jazz. The merchants laugh when you ask how they keep track of it all. We don't, says one. We just make sure someone else does. And so you leave the Low Countries feeling dizzy, awestruck, and a little queasy. Because this isn't just commerce. It's faith in motion. A swirling storm of ink, promise, and human optimism. They haven't just accepted paper. They've styled it, hacked it, turned it into art, into performance. And tomorrow, they'll do it all again. Now you head south again, but not too far, just enough to find yourself in a peculiar patch of medieval Europe where the rules shift, the markets sparkle, and the city walls themselves seem to whisper in several languages at once. Welcome to the great trading hubs of the Mediterranean, Genoa, Barcelona, and Marseille, crossroads of merchants, mercenaries, monks, and the most imaginative paperwork Europe has ever seen. The Mediterranean doesn't just embrace paper, it marinates in it. You dock in Genoa, a city that practically runs on speculation. Here, the air smells of sea salt and risk. Ships are still the backbone of everything, but the paper behind those ships is where the magic lies. You're introduced to the notary system, an institution so dense with ink and formality, it feels like the legal version of an alchemist's lab. Geno's notaries don't just witness deals. They engineer them. You watch a wool merchant and a spice importer negotiate a contract that includes future deliveries, delayed payments, and interest clauses, all written down in a language so formal it might as well be Latin cosplay. Then the notary stamps it. Boom. It's law now. You glance at your own boots and wonder if they're technically collateral under Genos maritime code. One fascinating artifact you're shown is the Commenda contract, a marvel of financial imagination. It lets a wealthy investor fund a sea voyage, while the sailor gets a cut of the profits if the goods make it back. But the investor bears most of the loss if the ship sinks. Risk delegation, 13th century style. The paper behind these deals is meticulous. Duplicates, triplicates, even copies stored in separate cities, just in case one burns down or falls into enemy hands. And this is where your mind starts to melt a little. Because Genoa, and its cousin cities, have figured something out that others haven't. Paper can travel without you. It can promise what doesn't exist yet. It can settle debts without touching metal. It can cross borders faster than a ship ever could. You watch a merchant pay for goods in Barcelona using a letter of transfer originating in Cyprus. The goods, the buyer, and the seller are all in different places. But the paper connects them. You stumble into a tavern in Marseille and find a chalkboard showing the weekly rate of different merchant notes, like a proto-exchange board. Barcelona bills up. Tunis notes stable, someone says over wine and squid stew. It's a weird blend of dinner and stock ticker. Here's your quirky moment. In Barcelona, you find a merchant offering paper wallets made from actual parchment. He folds them like origami, includes pockets for letters of credit, tally slips, and even tiny charms for good luck. He swears it keeps your notes less cursed. You buy one. It smells like goat. Back in Genoa, you meet a scribe who tells you with a smirk, ink runs deeper than blood here. She's not wrong. Merchant families feud over unpaid letters of exchange the way nobles fight over castles. And yet, at the same time, they use paper alliances, contracts of mutual credit, timed payments, even shadow debts, to quietly work around those same feuds. Historians still argue whether Mediterranean paper finance was more advanced than Northern Europe's or simply more elegant. Some claim Genoa's contract libraries were the true ancestors of modern banking. Others argue the system depended too much on elite networks and personal seals. The truth, as always, swims somewhere in between. You visit a shipping warehouse in Barcelona and meet a clerk who tracks over 100 shipments with nothing but a stack of slips, a locked ledger, and his memory. He's never been on a ship. Never touched a barrel of saffron. But he knows where the goods are, when they're due, and who's owed what. You ask him how he keeps it straight. He winks. I trust the paper more than the people. Yet even in these hubs of order and ink, things fall apart. A scandal erupts in Marseille when a forged letter of exchange floods the port. 5 merchants claim they're owed the same bundle of coral, and no one can prove who's telling the truth. The document is perfect, seal, calligraphy, even the signature. The problem? It was signed by a man who's been dead for 3 years. The fallout is brutal. Trust crashes. Trade halts. People burn questionable notes just to avoid association. You watch a scribe weep as her carefully filed contracts are tossed into a canal. Everything was legal, she mutters. But no one believes anything anymore. You sit on a marble step at twilight, wondering what it means, how something as fragile as paper could hold up entire cities, and then, in a breath, collapse. And yet, even after the chaos, the next morning, people return. Merchants meet. Notes exchange. Seals are pressed. Because paper, for all its fragility, still beats hauling crates of coin across pirate-infested waters. Still beats mistrust. Still beats silence. And here, under this Mediterranean sun, you realize something. The sea gave them trade, but paper gave them scale. You head inland once more, to a land stitched with cities, castles, and more paperwork than a tax auditor's fever dream. Welcome to the Holy Roman Empire, medieval Europe's greatest bureaucratic jigsaw puzzle. A realm where emperors rule by parchment decree, merchants pray to ledgers, and city-states churn out more paper than an origami factory. You arrive in Nuremberg, feet sore and brain full, only to find that even getting into the city requires paperwork. A guard stops you, asks your trade, flips through a scroll, and waves you in with a grunt. Just don't sell snake oil, he mutters. You don't have snake oil. You do have a small paper wallet that smells vaguely like goat. Inside, it's all guild halls, winding alleys, and the quiet scribble of quills on parchment. You duck into a merchant house and overhear a father teaching his son the family ledger system, each trade written twice, debts red, credits black. It's like a bedtime story, but with interest rates. Germany isn't just using paper, it's organizing it. Unlike the freewheeling experiments of Genoa or Bruges, cities here wrap their paperwork in layers of civic structure. Town councils stamp notes with city crests. Guilds notarize credit slips. There are rules, systems, and archives. Oh, the archives. You step into one in Augsburg and nearly trip over a mound of old salt contracts. A clerk just shrugs. We don't throw anything away. One fringe detail that catches your eye. In Frankfurt, you witness a baker pay his annual flour tax with a set of token-like paper slips. They're issued by the Grain Guild and function almost like a prepaid card, redeemable at local mills. It's localized, limited, and entirely based on trust in the guild's word. Paper currency, but very, very small scale. You spot more of these microeconomies all across the empire. Some towns accept only their own paper. Others swap standardized guild notes. You even find one village that prints its own beer credits, literally usable only at the town brewery. The font is Comic Sans before it was a sin. Here's your quirky bit. In Lübeck, you stumble into a tavern where you can buy a round of drinks with a joke promissory note. It reads, I, hands the slightly tipsy, do solemnly swear to pay 1 beer and a pretzel to whoever holds this paper, unless I am too hungover to remember. It's signed, stamped with a potato, and somehow accepted. And still, the paperwork here isn't just a joke. It's identity. You watch a young blacksmith try to join the guild, not with a sword but with a portfolio, an actual bundle of apprenticeship letters, merchant recommendations, and his father's debt guarantee. The council weighs the papers, not the man. He's creditworthy, says the chair, and just like that, he's in. You find yourself in Regensburg during tax season, fun times. Every household submits paper inventories of property and livestock. A team of scribes cross-checks them with street records, and discrepancies are quietly noted in red ink. No accusations. Just notes. Later, someone shows up at your door holding a corrected form. "Your cow's name is spelled wrong," she says. "And we heard you have too." Historians still argue whether the Holy Roman Empire was ahead of its time or hopelessly tangled in its own scrolls. Some say its paperwork laid the groundwork for modern civil administration. Others say it was a bureaucratic mess that moved so slowly it could have been outpaced by a drunk snail with a quill. Either way, it worked at least most of the time. The friction comes when systems overlap. A merchant might owe money to his city council, his guild, the local bishop, and the emperor, all tracked on different ledgers, all due on different paper. You watch one man unravel 5 documents to prove he doesn't owe a 6th. "My debt to the bishop cancels my debt to the council," he explains. Because they both taxed the same grain shipment. You believe him. Mostly. But you also see where this is going. Confusion breeds loopholes. And loopholes breed risk. In Cologne, you hear rumors of phantom bills, paper debts written off the books, traded in backrooms, then suddenly enforced when convenient. One brewer says his cousin lost his home over a slip of paper no one can find anymore. Still, for every shady scheme, there's a stunning innovation. In mines, you're shown a citywide debt registry, a master book of all registered loans over 10 florins. It's protected by 3 locks and overseen by rotating officials, none of whom can open it alone. It's basically medieval 2-factor authentication. People trust this book. So much that a debt listed in it is considered more reliable than a verbal promise. Even coins are less convincing. By the time you reach the imperial court at Speyer, you're not surprised to find the emperor issuing edicts on massive scrolls, some of which double as currency guarantees. You read one that declares, "All debts signed in Frankfurt shall be honored within the bounds of the empire, else be subject to divine and earthly penalties." That's a fancy way of saying, if you mess with Frankfurt's paper, God and the emperor will both come for you. But the crown jewel of the empire's paper system isn't gold-backed notes or tax slips. It's memory. You meet an old woman in Ulm who remembers every paper promise ever made to her family. She pulls a chest from under her bed full of notes, some faded, some cracked. She touches each one gently and says, "This one fed us when the river flooded. This one kept the wolves off our land. This one paid for my son's tools." She doesn't need a bank. She has paper ghosts, and she trusts them more than flesh. You've wandered the chaotic corridors of medieval finance long enough now to know this. Paper isn't just paper. It's faith, fear, and the thinnest line between fortune and fraud. Now, your journey brings you to the very bleeding edge of 13th century innovation. Not in one place, but in a scattered pattern across borders, across classes, across a continent that still doesn't quite believe that money can be made of pulp and ink. You're in a smoky roadside in near Prague, watching a bearded scholar unroll a letter from Venice. He isn't a merchant. He's a scribe for hire, and this letter isn't a bill or a love poem. It's a proposal to create an intercity ledger. A network of trusted notaries sharing records between cities to prevent fraud and track credit across the empire. You blink. That's medieval blockchain, basically. The idea won't catch on fully for a few centuries, but the impulse is here. A yearning for something larger than memory. Something portable, provable, and public. You step outside and cross into Poland, where you find peasants using a strange hybrid system, coins for small things, barter for daily trade, and, increasingly, trust slips. These are handwritten IOUs, scribbled between villagers, sometimes sealed with a thumbprint or a smear of wax. Most are never redeemed. But they're not meant to be. They're social currency, not economic. A chicken lent. A loaf returned. A paper handshake. One farmer even shows you a small scroll wrapped around a chicken's leg. It reads, "This bird is on loan to Father Joseph until harvest." You ask why it's written. He replies, because people forget, but paper shames them. And there it is again, that weird, weightless magic. By now you're exhausted. The journey has taken you through Italian counting houses, French wine stalls, German guild courts, Byzantine treasuries, and dusty Slavic barns. Your goat-scented paper wallet is bursting with notes, half-valid credits, and more than a few suspicious seals. So naturally, this is when it gets truly surreal. You find yourself in Paris during a gathering of scholars at the University of Sorbonne. Theology and logic swirl in the candlelit halls, but the talk tonight is money. Not just trade or coins, but the morality of paper. Is a promise on parchment equal to a coin of silver? One professor asks. Does intent make paper holy, or must it be backed by toil? Another counters. You sip watery wine and listen as the philosophers debate whether a forged note, used for good, is more sinful than a pure coin used for evil. The discussion feels like a dream. Or a tweet thread. The fringe detail here, you meet a scholar with a theory that the soul leaves a trace on anything it touches, especially written words. He keeps all his IOUs in a locked drawer. Not because he wants to enforce them, but because he believes they're spiritually binding. You want to laugh, but you've seen too much to be sure he's wrong. Historians still argue whether these far-flung developments, IOUs in huts, double-entry ledgers in Florence, phantom bills in Marseille, constitute the birth of modern finance or just a scattered dress rehearsal. Some say paper money truly began when it was regulated. Others say it began when it was believed. Either way, the world is on the brink of something vast. You leave Paris with a stack of half-worthless slips in your coat and a lingering sense that reality is being rewritten, quietly, carefully, by ink. But before you go, you pause in a town square near Bruges where a crowd gathers. A boy, maybe 12, stands on a box, waving a folded paper in the air. "Who wants a deal?" he cries. "I'll sell you a cow I don't yet own for money I don't yet have." People laugh, but a few actually step forward. One trades him a small token. Another writes her name down. The boy grins. You walk away shaking your head, realizing, he gets it. The dream, the danger, the whole paper dance, it's spreading. And even if most people don't quite understand it yet, you do. Because you've been there. You've seen it all. From bark-backed promissory notes to Byzantine bureaucrats with ink-stained robes, from perfume-scented merchant ledgers to potato-stamped beer credits. You didn't survive all of it, of course. You got scammed once or twice. Misread a few contracts. Nearly sold your shoes to pay for bread. But you learned the truth. In the 13th century, Europeans feared paper money because it wasn't just new, it was invisible. And yet, invisibility has always been the real source of magic. And now, as the candlelight fades and the world slows its spinning, you sit beneath the sky, which has gone soft and purple at the edges. The last page of your strange medieval ledger flutters in the breeze like a sleepy sigh, and the noises of trade and argument and scribbling ink all melt into a gentle hum. You're still holding that paper wallet. Still feeling the creases and the quiet weight of belief folded inside. Maybe it's just goatskin and scribbles. Or maybe it's a piece of someone's memory, someone's gamble, someone's dream trying not to be forgotten. You lean back against an old stone wall, the kind that's watched 1,000 deals pass by. The air smells of parchment dust and faraway lavender. You close your eyes, and even the thoughts begin to soften. The noise of the merchants is gone now. The frantic scratching of quills, the heated debates, the sea salt arguments over invisible coins, they've quieted. All that's left is the memory of how paper changed a world that wasn't quite ready. But still, it changed it. And maybe that's the real trick of it. Change never waits for permission. It just arrives. With a scrap of ink, a borrowed trust, and a signature that hopes tomorrow will be kinder than today. So sleep now, traveler. The world is still confusing. But your ledger is closed for tonight.